Whenever I was younger, I was a very mean child. Not necessarily always in a bully sense, but I was just very confrontational. A lot of the times I didn't want to be bothered. When I didn't want to be bothered with something or with somebody, I was never afraid to make that known. I wasn't somebody who managed their temper in a healthy or appropriate way. There would be times where I would get upset with people and I would just start high-pitched screaming at them. There wasn't any real regard for whether or not I was hurting people's feelings. I'm gonna be honest, there was a large part of me that actually kind of enjoyed hurting people's feelings if they were doing something to upset me. I know that sounds really bad, but like I said, I never claimed to be nice as a child. On top of my confrontational nature, I was also somebody who was very assertive at school and at home. If I wanted something, if I wanted somebody to stop doing something, I was not gonna be afraid to make that known. I was not gonna shy away from articulating what I wanted. It was pretty much I was gonna get my way and I wasn't gonna shut up until I got what I wanted. There were just a lot of times when I was very assertive and wasn't aware of a more respectful and appropriate way to express my desires. Even though I didn't always or really ever go about it in the right way, one thing that I really respect about my younger self is that I didn't shy away from ever speaking up. I had no fear whatsoever when it came to expressing what I wanted and confronting issues that I had. Using my voice and speaking up for myself was just something that came very natural to me. External factors caused that to really change. One thing that caused a shift for me was the way that I was criticized for being how I was. Like I said, I know that I was a handful as a kid. The same can be said for a lot of people when they're children. They don't really know any better. They don't know how to properly regulate their emotions. There's a more appropriate way to criticize a child without calling them out of their name or saying certain things about them that they may internalize, whether it's calling them too sensitive, uptight, mean. I just think that there's better ways to communicate that criticism. Times where I might have been too confrontational or I may have been overreacting about something, it would have been great for those to be used as learning lessons instead of me being told some of the things that I was told about myself. Another thing that caused this shift was just that natural desire to be accepted, especially going into my teen years. Like I mentioned earlier, when it came to confronting peers about issues that I had with them, I had absolutely no problem doing that. I had no problem screaming at people and yelling at them if I didn't like something that they were doing, even if what they were doing didn't really even have anything to do with me. It reached a point where there were some times when kids at school were doing things that they knew they shouldn't be doing, and all it took was me looking in their direction for them to stop. Sometimes people would even apologize if I even looked at them without even saying anything. That pretty much is a testament to how I was as a child. At first, I really didn't mind people reacting a certain way to me. It showed that people weren't going to be running over you. When I got into later elementary school, in my little kid mind, whenever somebody would stop being themselves just with me being in that person's presence or looking in their direction, I took that as people reacting a certain way to me. I think they knew I might have expressed that I wasn't cool with what they were doing. Being a preteen, approaching that age where you want to be accepted by people, you want people to think of you as cool or easy to be around. I didn't want people to feel like they couldn't have fun around me. Part of me felt really uneasy about that perception. By the time that I got into middle school, I did start to be more passive. I do remember some points in middle school where I was still able to express issues that I had with people. I wasn't always afraid of telling somebody to stop doing something. It took a little bit more to do that. It was something where they had to keep doing something. I remember this one guy in my theater class in middle school. He just kept touching me and tickling me, and it always bothered me. And at first I was trying to laugh it off, but then he kept doing it and I just said, stop doing that. And I even felt guilty for telling him to stop doing that, but I should not have felt guilty about not wanting my personal space to be violated. That was something that started to be a common thing. I felt really guilty for speaking up. When you're in middle school, you want to be the person that people want to have friendships with. You want to be the person that's fun to be around. When you're that young, you don't really have a healthy understanding of what it means to appropriately set boundaries in relationships. I definitely remember having some verbal confrontations, but but they weren't nearly as abrasive as they were when I was in elementary school. I had gotten past the yelling and screaming at people. Even though I had these moments, I also remember there being times where I wanted to be accepted by certain people, and these people would do things to disrespect and violate me, whether it was body shaming, calling me out of my name, making derogatory remarks. Because I didn't want to be seen as uptight, overly sensitive, killing the mood, I didn't speak up when I felt disrespected by them. Not saying anything when I felt disrespected did not actually help me build real friendships. All it did was cause resentment and bitterness against these people to accumulate, because a lot of the times they'd say and do the same things repeatedly, and maybe they were trying to be malicious, or maybe they just genuinely didn't realize that what they were doing was bothering me. Either way, I never gave them a chance to address and possibly atone for their actions, because I never addressed those actions in the first place. I just became very afraid of confrontation. Whenever I got used to not speaking up, I realized how much easier it felt to just distance yourself from people instead of having hard conversations with them. Going into high school, I envisioned myself being a social climber. I pictured myself being a part of multiple different friend groups, being invited to cool hangouts, and just having a very active social life. Ironically enough, that actually ended up being the complete opposite of what happened to me in high school, but that's for another video. One of the things that I intended to do in order to achieve this social climbing status that I dreamt of having was to curate a new image for myself. Even after middle school, I felt like I was still always seen as this uptight, can't take a joke, doesn't know how to have fun type of person. Since I was going into high school, I was going into a school with new people, some of whom I had never seen the likes of. I had what I felt was an opportunity to make this impression on them. What that meant for me was having any kind of boundaries against anybody was completely out of the window. I was going to be this cool, laid back, easy to be around, doesn't really have an issue with anything kind of person. Or at least that's what I was going to portray myself as, because of course we're people. Of course we're going to have issues with being disrespected and feeling violated and called out of our names. But I was going to portray myself as this cool, go with the flow, chill, funny person who can easily take a joke, who wasn't going to snitch on anybody for doing something wrong. I tolerated a lot of disrespect, whether that was being called out of my name, being called a racial slur, people making jokes, speculating on my sexual orientation. I really wasn't okay with any of that stuff. I just had a lot of times where people would disrespect and bother me, and I would just laugh it off and play it off as a joke. I was even close to letting somebody who was straight out of reform school, I'm not even exaggerating, I was close to letting this person borrow my phone. I had people pressuring me to let this person use my phone. It was actually this close to letting them borrow my phone because I didn't want to be seen as uptight or mean, because that's what they were saying about me. They were saying, I thought you were nice, you're cool, why wouldn't you want to do this? I was just really uncomfortable putting up boundaries and saying no to people because I didn't want to be perceived a certain way. I wanted to be cool with things that I normally wouldn't have been cool with and still wasn't okay with. Again, none of this actually helped me develop a real friendship. I ended up leaving traditional schooling and I was away from people for a while. I did a lot of reflecting on my experiences and I realized that I was still resentful about things that had happened years prior, even things that didn't really seem that drastic. And I was still reliving situations in which I felt disrespected and I didn't say anything about it. As much as I was upset about the people that were responsible, I also had a lot of resentment towards myself. I was upset with myself for just laughing things off and not standing my ground even when I knew certain things were bothering me. The reflection that I was doing in these moments opened my eyes to what I was doing to myself. I was bending over backwards trying to accommodate other people because I didn't want to be perceived a certain way. I was so worried about how other people were perceiving me. I didn't even realize that I was hurting my own perception of myself. And I realized then that I really needed to make a change. I had fully acknowledged that everything that I talked about was causing problems for me. I had wired my brain so much to be this passive people pleaser. It was going to take a lot for me to really get out of that. I'd done a lot of maturing, and so I'd kind of gotten out of a really self-righteous mindset that I had been in for pretty much the majority of my life, and I was trying to be more gracious with people. The problem that I noticed was that I had become a little bit too gracious, and I blurred the line between being gracious versus being passive. I There was one time towards the end of 2023 where I was working at one of my retail jobs. I was actually working 2 seasonal jobs simultaneously. I was talking to a coworker who was actually very friendly to me. I'm not somebody who naturally opens up to people. I'm not someone who's super talkative, but I could tell that this coworker was sort of trying to get me to warm up to them. So during a shift one evening, whenever we were both working at one of the clothing tables, I decided that I was going to try to connect more with this person. I was just asking them about their past work experiences, life experiences. They were talking to me as well. I started to feel really comfortable opening up and engaging with them on a personal level. Conversation is going really well, and then at some point in the conversation, this person says to me, "I don't mean to sound insensitive, but can you open up more about your transitioning journey?" And that question obviously indicated that they believed that I was transgender, and they felt comfortable enough to voice that assumption to me. I just want to clarify that I'm not trying to convey any negativity towards transgender people. That's not why I was bothered by what she said. Naturally, when somebody feels comfortable making that drastic of an assumption about you based off of your physical characteristics, it's reasonable to feel uncomfortable. I think that I honestly felt more uncomfortable than I allowed myself to feel, and I was bargaining with myself on, should I even be offended? Should I say something? Am I upset about this because of my own insecurities? Did this person even do anything wrong? The comment also had an effect on me for the following days. Throughout my time working, I was constantly thinking, is everybody looking at me and speculating about my gender identity, saying these things or thinking these things about me and just not saying them directly to me? It just kind of unlocked this new level of insecurity that I didn't even realize I was suppressing. Even though I was going through this mental whirlwind, I still didn't vocalize any of this to the woman who made the comment because I knew she wasn't trying to be rude, and I was worried about making her feel guilty. I was worried about her feelings and making her feel bad, even though she didn't really consider my feelings when she made that comment. I called myself being gracious by protecting her feelings and not wanting to say anything about it to her. Another situation was New Year's Eve of 2023. I was coming off of a really late retail shift at the same store, and because to this day I still don't drive, I was calling an Uber. Whenever I call Uber, I always pick the rideshare option just because if there's a co-rider with you, there's a chance that you can save money. So I always want there to be a chance for me to save money. After 30 minutes of me waiting alone by myself at the front of the store in the dark, my Uber finally arrived, and it was just luck of the draw that for this Uber ride, I happened to have a co-rider. The co-rider ended up being a drunk 34-year-old woman who was sitting in the back of the car by the time I'd already arrived, and the reason why I still remember her age is just because I remember her telling me her age and just being so flabbergasted and confused that somebody at this age was really sitting in the back of a car making fun of an 18-year-old. Right off the bat, this woman started irritating me. Apparently, she heard me singing before I got into the car, which I don't believe I was at the time, but even if I was, I don't think I was singing loud enough for her to hear with the car door closed. She just started bugging me about hitting some kind of high note. Like I said, I literally had been waiting for nearly 35 minutes outside by myself after a really long and exhausting shift on New Year's Eve, so I really just wanted to have a quiet ride. I didn't want to be rude, so I was just laughing off what she was saying, thinking that that was the only time she was going to talk to me during that ride, but that wasn't the case. As the ride continues, she's still talking to me and she's still bothering me. She's making fun of the way that I talk, and she's saying, "Why do you sound so squeaky? Why does your voice sound so squeaky?" She's making fun of the way that I was smelling. She was talking about spraying perfume on me, making fun of me for smelling like outside. I do shower and I do take care of my hygiene, but I was coming off of a really long shift. Anybody who's worked at a grocery store knows how exhausting some of the work can be. I was also just waiting outside for 35 minutes, so I don't imagine that I was smelling the best, but there's still just a more tactful way to go about saying that. She's saying, "You smell like outside," and she's just being really irritating. I wanted to tell her to be quiet, and I really just wanted to have a peaceful ride. Again, I didn't want to come off as rude because I knew that this woman wasn't trying to be rude, even though she was being rude, so I just sort of smiled and laughed off her comments. At some point during the ride, she even stated to me that she was hoping that she wasn't making me uncomfortable. And of course, instead of me using that as an opportunity to say, "Actually, you were kind of making me a little bit uncomfortable. I thought you were being really rude to me earlier," I kind of just said, "Oh no, you're fine." The reason why is because I was trying to be gracious. I perceived what she said as somewhat as an apology, even though she didn't really apologize. I missed that opportunity to actually speak up and say that I felt disrespected and irritated by her. Whenever I'd finally gotten home, my Uber driver actually apologized on this woman's behalf. Like I said, she did say that she was drunk, which I could obviously tell. I kept telling the woman, I was like, no, it's okay. The Uber driver, she was like, no, it's not okay. And if somebody's going to be violating you, you need to speak up for yourself. You shouldn't have brushed that off the way that you just did. Somebody else calling me out on my people pleasing really was a wake-up call. I realized that I'm probably never going to see that woman again, the woman who was irritating me on that ride. So I'm never going to get a chance to confront her about disrespecting me. And the same thing applies to past situations. I'm never going to get to turn the dial back on time and stand up for myself in situations where I should have. I noticed that being a people pleaser has caused me to just have bitterness towards people even when that bitterness isn't warranted. I get so resentful. I never give people a chance to address things that are bothering me. I spend so much time biting my tongue. Even when it comes to little things, my brain is like, okay, these people are violating your boundaries and you have to endure it. I force myself to endure certain things by not speaking up. And it was so hard for me to express that resentment. So it just kept piling on. All the little things, they do add up. All those little times where you don't speak up. It could be as simple as somebody leaving trash on your desk. All those little things kept piling on top of each other, and it just caused me to be such a bitter person. That's what not speaking up has ultimately caused me. I wish I would have either been told or figured out on my own that you can still have boundaries and be a respectful person. My outlook on boundaries has changed. I think that having boundaries is actually the most respectful and considerate thing that you could do for yourself and for other people. Even though it might not seem that way, in setting boundaries, that's my way of showing people that I value them and I don't want to have resentment towards them in the future. That kind of leads me to my next point, which is establishing balance. This is something that I talked about earlier. I was never able to establish that healthy balance between caring about other people's feelings while still respecting my own. When I was younger, I did not care if I hurt people's feelings. I enjoyed hurting people's feelings. I did not have any tact when it came to the way that I expressed concerns. Being the age that I am now, I've definitely overcorrected. I care too much about people's feelings, so much so that I will try to nurture their feelings at the expense of my own. If you have an issue with somebody, you don't need to be confrontational. There's a way that you can confront people without apologizing while still keeping their feelings in mind. And the harsh reality is that sometimes it doesn't matter how respectful or tactful you are. You might end up upsetting somebody anyway whenever you try to correct them, and that's just a reality that you have to accept. It obviously is not the funnest thing to be corrected. I think that's just how humans are. People, we want to feel like we can do no wrong. Setting that boundary against them, it's a way of showing that I value myself. That's something that you just need to keep in mind. Another thing that I need to establish balance with is caring about personal perception. Whenever I was younger, I truly didn't care if I was going to be perceived as bossy, overly sensitive, mean, uptight. Whenever I started getting a little bit older, I started caring a lot about being perceived as those things. Again, instead of trying to find that healthy middle ground, I definitely started going way too much in the opposite direction. I want to have fun with people. I want to be able to laugh with people. I don't want to be somebody who's constantly seen as negative, who's constantly seen as not fun to be around. But at the same time, I have to accept the fact that there are just going to be times where I might be perceived in that way. I have to respect myself first and foremost. I'm not going to aim to be negative. I'm not going to aim to be bothered about everything. But if I feel disrespected, I should have the right to say something. And if somebody doesn't want to be my friend because of that, or if that changes the way somebody perceives me, then that's just how it's going to have to be. There is nothing nice or kind about being a people pleaser. I'm sure you guys have probably gathered that. I'm big on the saying, what you permit, you promote. If you are allowing people to walk over you, disrespect you, violate your boundaries, you are encouraging and giving a green light to that behavior. In any scenario where you would encourage someone to disrespect somebody else, you would be seen as a bully. If you are permitting someone to disrespect and violate you by not saying anything, you are in turn kind of bullying yourself. When it comes to situations where people aren't being malicious, you also do people a disservice by not letting them know that certain parts of their behavior are problematic. It's better for you to respect respectfully and graciously correct them than for them to not understand that their behavior is an issue and then potentially bring that kind of behavior to somebody who's not as gracious with them. The majority of the time, people are not necessarily aiming to be malicious, or sometimes they definitely are. A lot of the examples that I mentioned in this video, I think people genuinely thought that they were being funny. Sometimes people do make fun of people. That's sort of a form of endearment. You have to be the one to broach those hard conversations. Going back to the example of me working and that girl making that comment about me being transgender, after she made that comment, the vibe was just really awkward, and I assumed that she picked up on that as well. I assumed that she was gonna come to me to bring up that conversation, but she never ended up coming to me. She probably didn't know that I was bothered by what she said, and I should have been the one to just bring that to her attention. And there's a lot of people who do really have good intentions, even though you feel like they're disrespecting and violating you. So you just have to be the one to bring up that conversation instead of assuming that they're picking up on the fact that they're doing something wrong. This is something that I'm still struggling with. I wish that I could end this video and say that this is something that I've gotten over and giving you guys tips on how I got over it. But the reality is this is something that I still struggle with, and I think this is something that's still gonna be an ongoing battle for me. It is the thing where I feel trapped and I feel resentful towards myself that I don't have the courage to even call out little things that are bothering me. I need to be more patient with myself. That same thing can be said for a lot of you guys. I know I'm not the only one who struggles with this, so whenever I am interacting with people, I'm gonna try to open up the floor to them and let them know if I'm doing something that's bothering you or that's irritating you. Please tell me that without apologizing. Please respectfully bring that up to my attention by opening the floor up to other people. They in turn will open up the floor to you, and I think that's just a good starting point. I'm trying to end this on a positive note, but the reality is this is something that I'm still struggling with. I really do hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it was all over the place. I am trying to go for more of a personal approach when it comes to my videos, so I hope that it resonated with you guys, and I will see you guys soon in my next video. Peace. Yes! Okay, I finished it. Okay.